The story of the haunted house in Amityville began with the release of a best-selling novel. The book, titled The Amityville Horror: A True Story, written by J. Anson, was published in 1977 and quickly became a bestseller. Anson did not live in the infamous house. He was a professional writer hired to write a book based on real events. These events began on November 13, 1974, when 6 members of the DeFeo family were killed in the house. Ronald and Louise DeFeo, the parents, were shot along with their children, 2 sons and 2 daughters, while they were sleeping in their beds at night. The only surviving member of the family, Ronald Jr., was arrested and sentenced to prison for committing this crime. The strangest part was that all the victims in the house were found lying face down, as if someone was holding them down when they were shot. None of the family members woke up from the sound of gunshots, even though they were shot with a powerful rifle, the shots of which could be heard from a mile away. This murder shook the quiet neighborhood of Long Island. After the entire family was killed, the house was put up for sale. The following year, a new family, the Lutzes, moved into the house, George and Kathy Lutz, along with their 3 children. Soon, as they claimed, life in the house turned into a living nightmare. It turned out that the demons that had driven Ronald DeFeo to murder his entire family did not exist only in his mind but in reality. An unseen force tore doors off their hinges and slammed cupboard doors. A mysterious green slime oozed from the ceiling. Huge swarms of insects attacked the family, and a demonic face with burning red eyes peered into the house at night. Every night, George Lutz woke up at 3:15 a.m., the exact time when the DeFeo family murders occurred. The Lutz family called a priest to bless the house, but an unknown force pushed the priest out of the house, and a demonic voice told him to get out. The priest's hands developed blisters afterward. After 28 days of living in the house, the family fled and never returned. They left all their belongings in the house and never looked back. The story they told of their harrowing days and horrors in the house became widely known. The horrifying massacre that preceded the events described above occurred on a dark autumn night in 1974. On the evening of November 13th, at the address 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, Long Island, the police were called. Inside the house, they found the bodies of 6 members of the DeFeo family, all murdered in their beds. The victims of the massacre were Ronald DeFeo Jr., his wife Louise, their 2 young sons, Mark and John, and their 2 daughters, Dawn and Allison. Another son, Ronald DeFeo Jr., nicknamed Butch, the Butcher, remained unharmed. All the victims had been shot with a .35 caliber Marlin rifle around 3 o'clock in the morning. Local residents were shocked, as nothing like this had ever happened in their neighborhood before. The DeFeo children attended the local school along with other children from Amityville. Neighbors watched in horror as the police took Ronald DeFeo Jr. into custody. Later, he was convicted and sentenced to a long prison term for the murders. In June 1965, Ronald DeFeo Sr. purchased the 3-story Dutch colonial-style house at 112 Ocean Avenue, located in a beautiful waterfront location. The house had many rooms, and the DeFeo family appeared to be living the American dream, with a happy family, a luxurious home, and plenty of money. Mr. DeFeo even installed a sign in the yard with the inscription "High Hopes," symbolizing their happy family with big dreams for the future. However, behind the facade of success and happiness, the elder DeFeo concealed a dark personality. He had a propensity for fits of rage and violence, and he and his wife Louise frequently quarreled. Additionally, the elder DeFeo was a father whom the children neither loved nor trusted. The elder child of the DeFeo family, Butch, often became the target of his father's attacks when his father was in a bad mood. The boy grew up withdrawn and sullen, and he also suffered from excess weight, making him a target for bullying at school. His father constantly berated him for not being able to stand up for himself. However, within the house, Ronald DeFeo Sr. tolerated no disobedience. As Butch grew older, he became bigger and stronger than his father, and stopped meekly submitting to his father's beatings. At the age of 17, Ronald Jr., or Butch as his friends called him, became seriously involved with drugs and engaged in petty theft. His drug use led to his expulsion from school. His behavior also became increasingly aggressive, with outbursts resembling mental breakdowns. His temperament mirrored his father's, and as he entered his teenage years, he often engaged in physical fights with him. Even Ronald DeFeo Jr., with his volatile temperament, began to realize that his son's behavior was becoming increasingly abnormal. Despite being fairly well provided for, Butch had a job at his grandfather's car dealership, where he received a weekly allowance even when he didn't show up for work. He continued to resent his father, feeling that he was limiting his access to money. Ronald Sr. and Louise forced their son to see a psychiatrist, but it didn't help. Butch insisted that he was normal and refused to continue therapy. Resigned to his son's troubled nature, Ronald Sr. began buying him whatever he wanted just to placate him. At the age of 14, his father purchased a $14,000 boat for him to use on the Amityville River. If Butch needed money, he only had to ask his father, who would give him any amount. However, the conflicts with his father did not stop. In fact, they became more frequent and took on a dangerously violent tone. One evening, during an argument that escalated into physical violence between his parents, Butch retrieved a 12-gauge shotgun from his room, loaded a shell into the chamber, and descended downstairs. He entered the room, pointed the shotgun at his father, and pulled the trigger. Strangely, he missed. Ronald Sr. sat in his chair and froze in place while his son lowered the shotgun and left the room. Butch seemed completely indifferent to the fact that he had come perilously close to killing his father in cold blood. The argument ended, but Butch's behavior foreshadowed the horrifying events that would follow. Several weeks before the murders, the relationship between Butch and his father had reached a critical point. Butch was unhappy with the amounts of money he received from his father, so he hatched a plan with a friend to stage a fake robbery when he went to withdraw a $20,000 deposit from a local bank. They split the money between them, and Ronald Sr. was furious when he heard the story of the supposed robbery from his son. He initially lashed out at the bank employee who had trusted his son with such a large sum. When Ronald Sr. began to doubt his son's story, Butch decided to seek revenge. The police were called, and they questioned Butch. Instead of sticking to the fabricated robbery story, Butch became nervous and irritable with the police. When they started suspecting he was lying, he even became aggressive towards them. Butch cursed at them and even struck the car hood in a fit of rage. The police left him alone on that occasion, but Ronald Sr. drew his own conclusions. Now he was convinced that his own son had stolen the money. On the Friday before the murders, the police asked Butch to look at several photos to try to identify the robber who allegedly stole his money. At first he agreed, but at the last moment he refused. When his father learned of this, he demanded that Butch explain why he didn't want to help the authorities. They began shouting at each other, and then Butch ran to his car and drove away. This argument did not escalate into violence at that time, but tragedy was approaching. On the night of November 13th, it was cold in Amityville. The streets were deserted, and everyone in the house on Ocean Avenue had gone to bed except for Butch, who was in his room. The more he immersed himself in his thoughts, the clearer it became to him how he could permanently end all his problems. On the second floor, Butch retrieved a .35 caliber Marlin rifle from the closet and slowly made his way to his parents' room. He entered his parents' bedroom and shot his father twice, hitting him in the lower back. His father died instantly. After the first shot, the bullet passed through Ronald Jr.'s kidney and exited through his chest. The second shot penetrated his father's spine and lodged in the neck area. After shooting his mother, who had briefly regained consciousness but was unable to react in time, Butch fired 2 more shots into her. The bullets pierced her chest and right lung. Butch left his mother to bleed and continued his killing spree. Since the bodies of his younger brothers and sisters were found in their beds, it suggests that they didn't wake up from the sounds of the gunshots. Butch's next victims were his brothers, John and Mark. Standing between their beds, Butch gunned down the sleeping boys at close range. Mark died instantly, while John, who had his spine pierced by a bullet, twitched a few times before falling silent. Once again, The shots didn't awaken the other members of the DeFeo family. Finally, Butch entered his sister's room, where Donna and Allison slept. As Butch entered the room, Allison turned her head to see who had entered, and at that very moment Butch aimed the rifle at her face and pulled the trigger. He then shot Donna in the head. The bullet tore away the left side of her face. Both of Butch's sisters died instantly. The police reported that all 6 of Butch's victims were found lying face down. All of this took place around 3 o'clock in the morning. In less than 15 minutes, Ronald DeFeo Jr., known as Butch, brutally and cold-bloodedly murdered all the members of his family. Afterward, Butch calmly washed up, tidied his beard, put on jeans and work boots, wrapped his blood-soaked clothes and the rifle in a pillowcase, and drove away from the house in his car. Butch drove to Brooklyn and dumped the pillowcase in one of the storm drains. He then returned to Long Island and reported the incident to his grandfather's office as a workplace event. Butch attempted to confuse the investigation by claiming that the mafia had killed his family. Detectives became suspicious of Butch when they found an empty box of ammunition in the house that matched the type used in the murders. Butch's fabricated story unraveled within a few hours of questioning. "It all happened so fast, I just couldn't stop. It all went so fast," he confessed. When asked during the trial why he committed such a horrific crime, he replied, "Because I was convinced that if I didn't kill my family, they would kill me. So I was convinced that this was self-defense and there was nothing wrong with it. When I picked up the rifle, I had no doubts left about who I was. I am God." DeFeo attempted to avoid punishment by claiming insanity, which was supported by a defense psychiatrist, Dr. Daniel Schwartz. However, the prosecution's psychiatrist, Dr. Harold Zolan, argued that while DeFeo did suffer from an antisocial personality disorder, brought on by his use of heroin and LSD, he was fully aware of his actions at the time of the crime. On November 21, 1975, DeFeo was found guilty on 6 counts of second-degree murder and is currently serving a life sentence in the Green Haven Correctional Facility in New York State. The court determined that Ronald DeFeo Jr.'s motive for killing his entire family was the $200,000 he could collect from the insurance company. Although the trial concluded and DeFeo's guilt was fully established, many questions still remain about what really happened on that tragic November evening. Why didn't the children try to escape upon hearing the first gunshots? Why were all the victims found lying face down? Why didn't any of the neighbors hear the gunshots? One theory suggested that DeFeo drugged the family's dinner, causing no one to wake up as he shot them one by one as he moved from room to room. However, this theory was debunked after autopsies found no trace of drugs or narcotics in the victims' bodies. The police speculated that the house's walls muffled the sound of the gunshots, but many witnesses who had been inside the DeFeo house claimed that sounds from the street could be heard inside the house. Experts have noted that the Marlin .35 caliber rifle's shots can be heard up to a mile away, yet neighbors continue to assert that they only heard the DeFeo family dog barking that night. To this day, Butch, who has always been a liar, continues to change his story. It is still not entirely clear what role he played on that fateful evening and whether he acted alone. Investigations are ongoing in an effort to shed more light on this convoluted story. Just a year after the DeFeo family murders, a family of 5 moved into the house at Ocean Avenue 112 on December 18, 1975. George and Kathy Lutz, along with Kathy's 3 children from her previous marriage, Daniel, Christopher, and Missy, settled into the luxurious house, which they bought for only $80,000. They immediately liked the house. George Lutz claimed that this house was a dream come true for them, despite its horrifying history when 23-year-old Ronald DeFeo Jr. shot his entire family with a rifle. During a family meeting, the Lutzes, along with their children, decided that this history would not deter them from purchasing the house. On the day of their move, just for peace of mind, they invited a priest, Father Ray Pecoraro, to bless the house. During the blessing ceremony, as the family was moving their belongings into the house, the priest distinctly heard a strange male voice telling him, "Get out!" Afterward, as the Lutzes reported, the priest began feeling unwell and his hands started bleeding. When Father Pecoraro was driving home, the hood of his car suddenly opened, shattering the windshield. One of the welded door hinges broke and the car door hung in midair. The car came to a stop. The priest called a friend for help. Later, the windshield wipers in the car started moving back and forth uncontrollably and they couldn't be stopped. Despite everything, the Lutz family moved into the house, but within a few days, they began experiencing strange and unexplainable phenomena. They were only able to live in the house for 28 days before fleeing, claiming that the house was cursed. They never dared to return to the house to retrieve their belongings. Every time Father Ray Pecoraro attempted to help the family and bless the house, his hands would break out in blisters. They would burst and blood would ooze out. When a family member called the priest on the phone, the conversation was impossible to conduct because it was interrupted by horrifying sounds or screams, or the line simply went dead. Strange odors would appear in the house, rapidly emanating from nowhere and then disappearing just as quickly. The front door would slam shut in the middle of the night, even when it was locked. George Lutz, while in the house, constantly felt cold. He would burn the fireplace day and night, trying to warm up even a little. The windows would constantly open by themselves and then slam shut abruptly, as if someone was forcefully closing them. Doors would often come off their hinges even if securely locked. The Lutzes claimed that they would wake up at precisely 3:15 almost every night, the same time when DeFeo committed his horrific crime. One night, George Lutz woke up to hear the children's bed shaking as they slept on the floor above. He tried to go upstairs but couldn't do anything because an unknown force pinned him to the bed. On the same night, George saw his wife levitating above the bed. Kathy Lutz levitated several times, rising about 30 centimeters above her bed. The last time she levitated, she flew straight into the window. When George tried to pull her back, his wife's face suddenly transformed into the face of a 90-year-old woman with no teeth, gray hair, a face covered in grotesque wrinkles, and disgusting drool oozing from her toothless mouth. In the middle of winter, a swarm of flies suddenly appeared in one of the upper rooms of the house. A crucifix that Kathy had hung in the bathroom began to spin until it turned upside down, and black liquid started oozing from it, emitting a nauseating odor. Kathy discovered a small secret room in the basement that wasn't on the house's plans. Inside, the entire room was painted red and smelled of blood. On one of the red walls, Kathy saw a demonic face. Later, she recognized it as the face of Ronald DeFeo, whose photo she had seen in one of the news articles. A bartender who worked at one of the parties in the house on Ocean Avenue 112 when the DeFeos lived there told George Lutz that he also stumbled upon the red room in the basement. He recounted that nightmares haunted him for years afterward. In his nightmares, he saw people killing pigs and dogs in that room and using their blood for an incomprehensible ritual. Once, while outside the house, George Lutz saw the face of a pig with burning red eyes in his daughter Missy's room. Missy began constantly uttering a strange phrase. "My friend Jody, the biggest pig you've ever seen." One evening, Missy pointed at a window where Kathy Lutz saw two burning pig-like eyes and said it was Jody and he wanted to come inside. Kathy Lutz grabbed a chair and threw it at the window. As Kathy describes it, there was a scream similar to the cry of a wounded animal. These eyes appeared again at a window near the stairs. When George Lutz ran outside, he noticed tracks in the snow in front of the window. These tracks couldn't belong to a human. They resembled the footprints of a giant pig. Kathy Lutz began to feel invisible hands grabbing her. Red marks from the grips remained on her arms. Invisible hands continued to grab her, and one day she discovered her entire body covered in red welts, as if someone had applied a hot poker to her body. Sticky liquid began to ooze from the ceiling, the stairs, and the doors. The toilet and two sinks in the bathroom turned completely black, as if someone had painted them black. Kathy tried to clean them with bleach, but it had no effect. In the living room, a phantom figure in a white hooded robe with no face, as if it had been shot off, would constantly appear in the wall where the fireplace burned. Just 28 days after moving in, the Lutz family fled the house, leaving their clothes in the closets and food in the refrigerator. They believed that if they hadn't left, something terrible would have inevitably happened. The Amityville Horror remains one of the scariest and most haunting stories, simply because all these events actually happened. Several horror movies have been made based on this story, depicting how otherworldly forces abruptly intrude into a family's normal life after moving into a cursed house.